Welcome to Food for Thought, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated and defined by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. Today's episode is Horse Words Part 2, Animalogies. I didn't want to give away any of the words in the title, so we're just calling it Horse Words Part 2. Before we begin, my name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I am your host at joyfulvegan.com, my website. You can find signed copies of my books. You can find my 30-day vegan challenge, my online cooking classes. We have a library of on-demand classes. We have upcoming live classes and lots more. You can now sign up for private classes. You can sign up for one-on-one personal coaching. And you can find gift cards, which is the newest edition. This podcast is listener supported. So if it's something you value and you'd like to enjoy some perks while supporting, you can go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to become a supporter today at your chosen level. You can also just go to joyfulvegan.com and you can see the various levels and the various associated perks. At joyfulvegantrips.com, you can see all of the current available all-inclusive vegan trips, and you can also see the ones we've done in the past and that we're doing in the future. So we are leaving soon for Rwanda. We'll be hosting a group of people in Rwanda to see the mountain gorillas, chimpanzees, golden monkeys. We are hosting a group in South Africa and Botswana, starting in Cape Town. We're not really spending a lot of time in South Africa. We're going to be in Botswana most of the time in camps, and we're going to be seeing giraffes and lions and elephants and hippos and all of the amazing animals in this part of the world. We are scouting actually the garden route in South Africa. So that is a trip that we will probably be hosting through Joyful Vegan Trips at some point. We also finally have announced that Japan will probably happen in 2024. We have hundreds of people on the waiting list for Japan. Japan was closed down for so long because of COVID, and we weren't able to go scout there. So we now will be able to go scout in 2023, and we think we'll be able to have that trip in 2024. So even though there's hundreds of people on the waiting list, get your name on the waiting list if you're interested, because you never know. People, can't do it the time that we run it. They changed their mind, what have you. So make sure you're on any of the lists, any of the wait lists for any of the trips that we've done in the past that we think we'll do in the future. And of course, you can book right now. Northern Italy, I think there's one spot left. I think there's one double room left for Northern Italy, which is where we hike in the Dolomites. We're up in the Alpe di Suisse. It's just the most incredible part of Italy that you've probably never been to. And it's just lovely. So that is in June of 2023. One double room left. In for Tuscany, which is just before the Northern Italy trip, we have a couple rooms left. And if you do want to take advantage of Northern Italy and you think you might want to do Tuscany as well, you can sign up for both. And then we help you get from one place to the next. That's a complimentary train ride and hotel room as we transition from our Tuscany trip to our Northern Italy trip. And then we have just announced, and we have already started filling up our France trip. So in 2023, we are focused 100% on Europe. I named Tuscany and Northern Italy. We are now going to be going to France. It's called the French countryside, and we'll be in the Loire Valley and the Dordogne Valley. We start in Paris, we end in Bordeaux. And this trip is going to be quintessential French countryside. We're talking picnics by the river, boats on the river, staying in a castle, staying in Chateau, visiting Lascaux Caves. We actually have a joke that we named this trip. What did we call it? Paris to Bordeaux, Chateau, because of Chateau, Bateau, which are boats, Gâteau, which is cake, Lascaux, which are the Lascaux Caves, the prehistoric caves. Let's go. So check out joyfulvegantrips.com for that trip. And finally, we are running one of our most popular trips again to Alsace. This is in France, also in the eastern part of France, totally different part of France. And this is our magical Christmas trip. So this is fairy tale, twinkly lights, staying in this really incredible 17th century villa. This is medieval cobblestones, towns and streets, and it's a really wonderful, magical trip. So if you want to join us, it's just before Christmas, so you can still make it home for Christmas. That's also now released. We have an early bird price special, so you really don't want to delay either of these trips. Once they fill up, and get to the minimum number to confirm these trips, we're 100% confirmed, the price is going up. And as I said, these trips have already gone out to some of our early bird access folks, people who've been on trips with us in the past. It's one of the benefits of traveling with us. You get early access to trips before they go to the public. They have gone out to patrons at the Patreon, over at Patreon at certain levels, and also people who are on the wait list for these trips. So it's technically getting released on November 5th, but that's only a day away from when I'm recording this. So by the time you hear this, it will probably be live, and the early bird price, as I said, will be in place until we are 100% confirmed, and then it will go up. So if you are in any way interested in these trips, don't hesitate to go to joyfulvegantrips.com. So lots of really exciting things. I hope you're doing well in general. It's been a busy time over here. My husband celebrated his 50th birthday. I'm glad he's finally in my decade. And I had a big surprise for him planned. I wanted to talk about it on the episode I did on creating surprises, but I couldn't talk about it because David does listen to my podcast. And he's also a supporter. He is a supporter. He's the main supporter. He's the main supporter of this work. But he celebrated his 50th, and I wanted to talk about the surprise I had planned, but I couldn't. So both of his brothers were supposed to come out to surprise him, but one of his brothers got COVID just beforehand. He was fine. It was just kind of a bad cold, but of course he didn't want to get on a plane and come here. So he wasn't able to come, but Paul came, his brother Paul, and one of his best friends, Jared, who was his best man at our wedding. So he came from New Jersey and Paul came from New Jersey. Well, I guess technically Jared came from Pennsylvania. And they surprised him. He had no idea. And I work really hard at creating surprises. And I really thought David was on to me, but he wasn't, which is also a little surprising because I throw parties when the wind blows, and I'm surprised he didn't. And I throw surprise parties for him for just regular birthdays. For this milestone birthday, you would have thought he would have been on to me, but I was pretty good at keeping everything under wraps and talking about the fact that we're going to celebrate his birthday in South Africa when Seb and Brighty and I and David, travel on the garden route between our Rwanda and Botswana trips. Seb also turned 50 this year in 2022. And so I just kept saying, honey, I didn't do anything for your birthday because we're going to be in South Africa. We're going to be in Rwanda. We're going to be in Botswana. Like, isn't that enough? So I don't have anything planned for you. Well, I did. So I had a big party planned and surprised him the night before the party with his brothers coming out. So also, he probably didn't think we were going to be doing anything more than that. So I was able to get Jared and Paul to get David out of the house in the morning so that everybody could arrive by 1:00, and then David arrived home. So I actually had two surprises for him when he arrived because it was going to be difficult to get him to the back of the house where everyone would be outside on the patio, because he would see food and he would see the birthday banner. He would see evidence of a party before he saw the people. And I didn't want it to be ruined before people said surprise. And so I decided to split up the moment of surprise by having a number of our friends be at the door when he showed up. So they jumped out and yelled surprise, and he would have thought that was the end of that, and we were all going to go in the back and have lunch. So I told him everybody, we have lunch, go in the back. David, go in the back. We have lunch for everybody now. And there was another half of the party there in the back yelling surprise. So he didn't know everybody was going to be there. And then the other thing I did, and this is something I really recommend if you're planning a surprise for anybody you love, is I had friends from all over, friends who are local, friends who are here at the party, but also a lot of friends who live overseas or on the East Coast or just throughout the country, create a video tribute for him. So I created this larger tribute video. It was like 45 minutes long, based on these small, short videos that people created. So it was really special to sit down with him and look through all of these videos. About 45 people in the end created a birthday wish for him, video birthday wish. And I think the company I used was called Tribute. So if you just type in like video tribute, birthday video tribute, you should be able to find it. So it was lovely. We just also celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary. Obviously, that's right around his birthday, and we're preparing for Africa now. So it's been a wonderful, busy time, and this time of year is just my absolute favorite. That's why we got married this time of year. The foliage is in full swing. It is starting to rain. We started having some rain here, which is wonderful as we live in a drought state, and the weather is just getting chilly. And It just calls for hot cocoa and cozy fires inside. And so it's lovely. And so I hope you're doing well. If you are a subscriber or a listener of this podcast or of the limited run spin-off podcast called Animalogy, you know I'm very interested in the animal-related words and expressions we use every day in the English language. And today we continue our horse-related animalogy. So I coined the word animalogy, if this is new to you, to refer to animal-related words and expressions. And so we delve into the origins of words and expressions. We've already done horse expressions, the obvious and the obscure. And we've done equestrians, cavalries, and hippos, horse-related words, part 1. And today we're doing horse-related words, part 2. We're delving back into horse-related words. Now I'm going to start with the most obvious ones that have the word horse right there in the word or in the term and explain their connection to our beautiful equine animals. Now, I'm not going to talk about the whys and wherefores again, but I want to remind you that we also have some well-known plants named after horses in a different episode called Animal Friendly Gardens, plants, flowers, and trees named after animals for more. But we had in that episode horsetail, horseradish, horse chestnut, horse mint, horse parsley, and horsefetch. So those are some plants that I talked about in that episode. We're not going to talk about those today, because we have a lot of new ones we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start with the familiar word sawhorse, which is a beam with 4 legs used to support a board or plank for sawing, right? A sawhorse. You've probably also seen what are also called sawhorses in construction zones. So they're painted orange and they're there to block traffic in a construction zone or stop people from coming into a construction zone, those are also called sawhorses. In certain circles and in certain countries, a sawhorse is also known as a sawbuck or a mule, and a short sawhorse is known as a pony. So all of these names come from the shape of the frame, which resemble a horse or a mule or a pony standing on 4 legs, and all of these are etymologies, right? So sawhorse, mule, pony, and sawbuck. Now, I talked about sawbuck in the episode called Don't Get My Goat or Buck the Trend, and these are all goat-related words. Buck, in this case, sawbuck, refers to a male goat for the same reason. An A-frame looks like these familiar 4-legged animals. So this is really just all about 4-legged animals: horses, mules, ponies, bucks. And I also talked in that episode about sawbuck being a slang term for a $10 bill. But these mostly have to do with buck related to goat. But all of these are etymologies. So sawhorse. You also have a term that's used to describe an apparatus that resembles a horse, in the loosest possible way, of course, again, just 4 legs. And that is the horse or the pommel horse in gymnastics, right? And that refers to this vaulting apparatus fitted with 2 curved handles used for swinging and vaulting exercises. So this apparatus is called either just a horse or called a pommel horse. Now, a pommel is the name of these grips and these handles, right? And you can picture this if you've seen any Olympics and gymnastics or if you participate in gymnastics. So you can picture the handles, right? Those handles are called the pommels. And that's also the name for the curved upper part of a saddle that you would put on a horse to ride. So I don't know. Do you think pommel is an etymology? I'm kind of on the fence about it. The etymology of the word pommel has nothing to do with horses per se, but pommel is the name of the curved part of a saddle, and there's no other meaning of it. And pommel horse is a reference to actual horses and horse riding, because the apparatus, the exercise gymnastics apparatus resembles a horse, and the pommel horse refers to the handles because that refers to the saddle. So I don't know. I'd like to know what you think. If you think pommel itself is an etymology, I'm on the fence. But pommel horse, this gymnastics apparatus, is an etymology, and it's also called a side horse. So again, etymology. Outside of gymnastics, you have a clothes horse for drying your clothes, of which I have one, right? A clothes horse, it's hard to say hard to say fast, clothes horse. It refers to, basically this thing you can fold or unfold. It's made of plastic or it's made of wood, and you dry your clothes on it. And this is actually a pretty ancient device. You can actually do an image search on Google and see antique versions of a clothes horse. It's a bit heftier and bulkier and does kind of resemble, again, this four-legged animal. Today, they're a lot simpler. The one I have is just, kind of thin rods, and there's a lot of them. They don't really resemble horses. They don't really resemble any four-legged animal. And, but there you have it. So they're still called clothes horse. If you search for that in Amazon, you would find just basically your drying rack for clothes. This apparatus also became a description for a person. So a clothes horse is a person whose chief interest and pleasure is dressing fashionably. So that came from this device where you would dry your clothes, became a word, a term for a person who loves to dress fashionably. So that's clothes horse. We have rocking horse, obviously. So that is an imitation horse made so a child can sit and rock on it. And I think you can picture that easily enough, but there you go. Rocking horse is in our vernacular, very common word. Horseshoes, speaking of children and games, we have the name for a game that I personally played growing up during every family and neighborhood gathering in our backyard. I think I've talked about the fact that my mother entertained and was the host for parties for the neighborhood, for family, for friends all the time. So I have that in my blood from her. And we used to, oh my gosh, we had a fairly large backyard that butted up against other neighbors' backyards, and we would just run from one house to the next. It was a pretty lovely way to grow up until my parents got divorced and we left that house, and that's a whole other conversation. It's a whole other story, but I have such fond memories of that house and that yard. And we used to play all sorts of games. We used to do three-legged races. We used to do sack races. We used to play horseshoes. And I have fond memories of that. Uncles and cousins and aunts all playing horseshoes in our backyard. And that entails, of course, players tossing horseshoes or horseshoe-shaped game pieces at a stake so as to encircle it or come close to encircling it than the other players, and that's how you play horseshoes. So horseshoes is a game. Horsepower, figuratively, horsepower means the capacity to achieve or produce, referring mostly to strength or talent. If you have horsepower, you have strength or talent. Technically, because that's figuratively now, but technically it's a unit of measurement of power or the rate at which work is done, usually referring to engines or machinery. And it is indeed an etymology. During the late 1700s, the steam engine began to do the work of horses in the mines. And the mine owners began to ask, well, how many horses would an engine replace, right? Because they have to kind of calculate the means of production for the mines. So James Watt, he was a Scottish engineer who invented the steam engine. He figured out a mathematical way to equate horses to engine power. And so he measured the capability of a large horse to pull a load, and he found that a large horse could pull a weight of 150 pounds while walking at 2.5 miles per hour. And so this worked out to 33,000 foot-pounds per minute or 550 foot-pounds per second. Beyond my ability to really kind of wrap my brain around that. But that's the idea. That's what horsepower is. So the term horsepower was invented, and it is still a technical term for machinery. And this is another example of where, in terms of us doing what we as advocates can to protect and change things for animals, advocate for them, obviously one of the obvious ways to advocate and to help animals is to not eat them. So you're not supporting an industry that is just obviously just characterized by violence and killing, bringing animals into this world only to kill them. And then, of course, all the other ways we exploit animals. This is another example of how technology actually saved and saves animals, because you have technology and engines changing the world for us humans, but also for animals. And horses, I think, were biggest beneficiaries of the steam engine, the engine. So in terms of them replacing certainly modes of transportation, they stopped being used as modes of transportation, both in terms of pulling carriages, but also in terms of being ridden. And we had the steam engine and then eventually the combustible engine in the car, et cetera. So an example of how technology really does save animals without meaning to. And so when a lot of people talk today about cultured meat and kind of the technologies that are being used to help animals today, there's a bit of, I think even among animal advocates, a bit of, well, no, that's not going to help animals. What it really has to do is people changing their behavior and their thinking about animals. And I think it's both, because we need to do both because not everybody's going to stop eating animals. Not everybody's going to stop eating animal products. Not everybody's going to become vegetarian or vegan. But if things just happen conveniently and they very easily can still have the texture of meat, but not be part of killing animals, in other words, slaughter-free meat, then that is a boon for all of these animals, just the way the steam engine was for horses. So little side note there. So that's horsepower. Iron horse is another machine horse-related etymology, and it's a slang term for a steam railroad locomotive. Now, it's archaic now. People don't really use that term anymore, but the term iron horse was first used for early steam engines at a time when horses still powered most machinery, as we just discussed. So a locomotive is powerful. It originally competed with the horse as a means of traveling and hauling, and so a locomotive engine was idiomatically called an iron horse. The term became popular and common in both British and North American English, especially in literary circles. So you'll see that in some literature, some old 18th century, 19th century literature. And as I said, its use has declined, but you'll still find it as a literary term. Interestingly, or I should say literature, it's also, I discovered this in my research. I did not know this. You maybe know this already, but it was one of the many nicknames for Lou Gehrig, who was a baseball player. He seemed to have a lot of nicknames, but Iron Horse was one of the most common nicknames for him. He was an amazing hitter, and so he was called an Iron Horse. So there you go, little baseball. You know me with my baseball trivia. The next term we have is, I'll say horseshite, be spelled S-H-I-T. Trying to keep my podcast clean. You know me, I do cuss. I love the word cuss. I cuss, I use profanity, I swear all the time, like a lot, but not on the podcast. So, I mean, even though it really is just it is a word, horseshit, is U.S. slang for nonsense, right? Now, the word S-H-I-T itself, meaning piece of excrement, is from Old English. It has Germanic roots. It goes back a long ways. Horse shite is relatively new, and it seems to be centered in the U.S. It comes into colloquial parlance around the 1950s as far as written records go. Now, there was also bull shite, bullshit. That's also a common English expletive and also an etymology because, of course, it refers to bulls, right? Cattle. And that dates a little earlier than horse. So bull, shite, dates around 1914, 1915 in British American slang. It looks like it comes into parlance during World War II. Both of those are etymologies, but worth saying there because you had, again, the word shite just as its own word, but there's something a little bit more, shall we say, descriptive about having the animal and the word shite. So horse and bull. Okay, so these are all familiar horse-related words. I know you know all of these, but I know that there is some times when we're just talking and we don't think about the animal behind horsepower. We don't think about, the pommel horse, and we don't think about a horse, right? So the reason I'm bringing up these very familiar terms is because these are etymologies. These are words that are used, I think, by the majority of us who speak English on a regular basis. But we do have some less familiar, but still in our vocabulary, horse-related etymologies that I want to share with you. There are a lot more that I'm not sharing with you because some are just so obscure, and I have them on my list. If you want me to do them, I can. I might include them as a bonus material for supporters. But what I'm going to do here now is share some less familiar, but I still think you will have heard of them, depending on kind of the world in which you live. So the first one is a horse pistol. Maybe you've heard of a horse pistol. It's a large pistol carried at the pommel. Huh? See what I did there? On the saddle. When on horseback. And this term, horse pistol, is attributed to the early 1700s. It's probably not a term any of us use on a daily basis, but it's a word with which I am familiar because I watch a lot of Western films. I know it sounds weird to watch Westerns. People might think there's so much exploitation, the horses are being tripped. Well, that's not the case with, by the way, the majority of horse Westerns that became a thing, and it's awful. And I'm not trying to justify in any way that the Westerns that I do enjoy, that I don't enjoy seeing the horses being ridden so hard and, they fall and all of that. I don't enjoy that part, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the story of the Westerns. And so I do really love Westerns. And so speaking of which, a Western, a nickname for a Western is actually a horse opera, because obviously these films take place during a time when horses were ridden and ridden hard. And so a nickname for a Western is a horse opera. So I think that's very interesting. I don't think it's used very often, but there you have it. The next is a term I learned from a friend who is a football aficionado, American football, and that is something called a horse collar or a horse collar tackle. So a horse collar, obviously just a horse collar is a band of rope or leather probably that's placed around a horse's neck to restrain or harness that horse, right? Boo, yeah, don't like that. But metaphorically speaking, the horse collar tackle is an American football maneuver in which a defender tackles another player by grabbing the back collar or the back inside of the opponent's shoulder pads and pulling that ball carrier directly downward violently in order to pull his feet out from underneath him. Seems illegal to me. I think it is a penalty at this point. I don't know a lot about American football. I don't know a lot about any kind of football or baseball, but I love that I can share some sports-related terms with you. I'm not going to make any presumptions about the demographics of my listeners and how many of you watch football or baseball, but I don't watch it either at all, ever. So the fact that I can even talk about sports terms is kind of fun. I mean, I talked all about horse racing in the last episode, so I also don't participate in that. It's just called research and learning. But anyway, the point is, I was talking about horse-related terms, and a friend of mine just brought up a horse collar tackle, and I was like, I love this. So when you ask me how I hear about these words and etymologies, it's because I'm always paying attention. It's because I'm always talking about this, and because I'm always taking notes and always adding to my list of etymologies. And so horse collar tackle was it was a serendipitous one because it wasn't something that I had found otherwise, other than through conversation with a friend. The next term, I want to say expression. I left expressions for the expression episode. This is a term that was completely new to me and one that I discovered on Atlas Obscura only in the last year. If you don't know Atlas Obscura, it's a wonderful online magazine. They're also a travel company. It was founded in 2009 by Joshua Foer, who's Jonathan Safran Foer's brother. You probably have heard of him. He's an author in his own right. And it's just a wonderful mailing list to be on. They have the most fascinating and obscure topics related to history and science and food and locations. And so I love getting their newsletter every day. It is a daily. Maybe you can do less than that, but I get it every day. So much information, and I'm always paying attention because there's always animal related things in there. And so this is where I heard about horse bread. And so if you listened to the Food for Thought podcast episode called Breaking Bread, Words from the Staff of Life, you would have heard, and you probably already know, about how important bread has been in the history of human civilization. Pretty important, pretty significant. To further this point, in medieval England, people consumed 2 to 3 pounds of bread every day. It was a staple in the diets of medieval Europe, mostly medieval England, but throughout Europe. And this part I didn't know about was there's something called horse bread, because even though people were eating a ton of bread, Horses were eating a ton of bread because they were working really hard, as we've kind of indicated, in terms of them hauling and being basically the workhorses of everything people needed. They were plowing, they were pulling, they were being ridden. And so after a long haul, horses were exhausted and they needed to rebound quickly for another trip. And so the people who were using the horses needed to fill them up with carbohydrates and calories pretty quickly. And so they invented or created or started focusing on horse bread, which is a brown bread. It's baked alongside human bread, right? But it's really dense and coarse and heavy and made with bran flour and molasses. Just the idea was to just get a ton of calories into the horses who needed a lot of energy to do the work they were doing. So that's called bread, horse bread. And according to some estimates, medieval horses consumed about 20 pounds of it a day. Now, you wouldn't feed that to a horse today. And during the industrial era, horse bread fell out of the diet of the English horse because they weren't being used as much. And so the horses being replaced by steam engines, they didn't need to make horse bread. But horse bread, who knew? I didn't, and I think that's fascinating. So moving on from horses to other words and terms of animals in the equine family, as I was recording this, I realized I didn't do a lot on mules, which I can do because there is a lot to say about mules, and I'll just do a separate episode because mules are obviously part donkey and part horse. So I will do an etymology episode on mules, but I do include ponies here because they are just small horses, and I talk about ponies in the etymology of ponies in the first part of this series, and so you can go check out more about that. But we do have some pony related words I want to just include here, and that's pony beer. You've probably heard of pony beer or pony keg, pony bottle, and all of those have to do with the smaller size. So a pony keg is smaller than a regular keg. Pony glass is smaller than a regular glass, and so there you have it, pony related words. And there's probably more, and I can include those in another episode. And I do talk about like ponytail and some other ones in the other episode in part 1. But let's move on to some words that don't have horse or pony in the term, in the word itself, but are hidden in the Latin origins and so on. And so let's start with a word that you would be familiar with, and a device you would definitely be familiar with if you live in Europe, and that is the bidet. The bidet. They are used less in the US, and even though we have a bidet in one of our bathrooms, it's really more of a bidet attachment in our toilet that's becoming more popular. Those of us who want to use less toilet paper. I mean, this has been a thing in Japan for years. David was actually really inspired. The first time he went to Japan, went to Tokyo, and he used one of these bidet attachment toilets where you basically have water doing the cleaning and instead of toilet paper. They're pretty incredible. So when we renovated David's bathroom, we put a bidet in, but it's not a bidet the way you would find in a European bathroom where you basically have a toilet and then you have a separate fixture. And that's a fixture that you would straddle to wash your bits after using the toilet. I don't really like those bidets, I have to say. I really prefer the bidet attachment that we have. But the word bidet is an etymology. The word bidet is French for pony. Now, how the word bidet came to refer to this hygiene device is unknown, but I think you could surmise how it came about. The bidet is a vessel that can be bestridden for bathing purposes. So you bestride it, right? One leg over the other side, the way you would bestride a horse. And so that's probably most likely the connection because of the French word for pony. And so it came to be used in the English language around 1760. Bidet is an etymology and a horse etymology at that. These are the kinds of things I love so much because it's just so fascinating and so much fun. Next, we have the word carbine, which is basically a short rifle, especially one adapted for mounted troops. It comes into English in the 16th century from French carabin, which was a soldier armed with a musket. that became then called a carbine because of the caravan is the soldier, and carbine, so carbine became the gun that this soldier used. So basically, a caravan in French referred to a light horseman as well as to the weapon they carried, and then it came into English as carbine. Now, the exact origin is uncertain, but it was indeed a short rifle used by a cavalry man, and in my opinion, it is an etymology, carbine. As you can see, when it comes to horse etymologies, many of them are related not only to the animal themselves, and I think we have a lot of that in especially part 1. We have words that are just related to the animal in the expressions, and in part 2 here we have a lot related to riding these animals. Like it or not, humans have been riding these horses, not animals, not just any animal, but horses for thousands of years. And in fact, because of recent archaeological finds, archaeologists have been able to pinpoint exactly when horse domestication began. They used to think it was about 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. They always knew it was in the steppes around Kazakhstan, but they have been able to determine and kind of pinpoint that it looks like horse domestication happened about 5,500 years ago in Kazakhstan, in that area, in the Ural, between the Ural Mountains. And one of the ways they can determine this was were able to determine this, was from skeletal remains of horses, some of whom had telltale traces of the use of what was called a thong bridle, or what is called a thong bridle, a bridle, on the gap between the teeth of the lower jaw. So they could see evidence of some kind of strap, right? This would have been a leather strap, a strip of leather inside the horse's mouth, and then trailing outside the horse's mouth to act as reins. And that's where you have this bridle from. So this thong bridle suggests in these archaeological finds that horses were probably ridden as early as 5,500 years ago. And so this device, and the word for this device, has been with us for many, many years, the word bridle. We even have the adjective unbridled to mean unrestrained, uncontrolled, uninhibited, because the idea is if you try and ride a horse without a bridle, right, you don't have any way to control or restrain him. So the word unbridled to mean, completely unrestrained came into English in the 14th century. In fact, this use of the word unbridled came into English through Chaucer. And so you didn't see it before the 1300s, unbridled, to refer to that. Now, the word bridle to describe the headgear to control or lead a horse, it's Old English. So it's much older than the word unbridled. And bridle came from Germanic languages, the term for that device itself, the headgear. But unbridled as an adjective came into English around the 1300s. Now, bridle as a word, as I said, was Old English. That word appears in other terms we use today, like bridle path. So that's a path suitable for horses. And you also see bridle road or bridle track. But if you see bridle path, if you're hiking and you just see that on a sign, because it refers to a path that is suitable for horses, because I know when I'm hiking, they do talk about that, because I think you'd find it especially in the UK. It refers to an area where horses can also go, as well as pedestrians, as well as hikers on foot. So that is bridle, which we already know is the device, the headgear for the horse, but unbridled is the adjective that refers to that etymology. It is an etymology, I'm saying, and then bridle path, also an etymology, because it's referring to horses. Now I'm segueing from bridle to the words bride and groom, because I've been asked many times by different people if those words are etymologies. Bride, and if they're related to horses, because bride sounds like bridle, and so some people think that's related, those words are related, and because groom is related to horses as well, right? So bride and groom are the words bride and groom etymologies, and if so, what do they have to do with animals, and in particular horses? So that's the question, and I'm going to answer that in a moment. I do want to take a moment to pay tribute to the sponsor of this podcast, or the sponsors of this podcast, and that's you, everyone who's a patron. I really appreciate it so much, because you are the ones making all of this work, all of the research, all of the time, all of the writing, all of the recording, all of the editing, all of the putting it out there for the world to hear. It's all possible because of you, including our newest superstar, Lilith Jones. Thank you so much, Lilith. Welcome to the Patreon family. Thank you so much for your support. We have new besties. We have Amanda Jane Alred. Thank you so much, Amanda Jane. Appreciate it so much. And our newest bestie, Amy Broadstone. Thank you, Amy. Amy, I try and write personal thank you notes to everybody who is a supporter. And I wrote to Amy thanking her, and she wrote back saying, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and I'm so glad to be able to support you. I love the work you do and have wanted to support you before. Now I finally can. So don't feel that if you haven't supported me in this podcast before, you can't do it now. There's always time, and there's always opportunity, and there's always a need. So thank you so much, Amy, and thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you so much, Lilith. And thank you, of course, to our benefactors, David Cabrera and Alexander Gray. Thank you to my angels, Brooke Boussard, Michal Stone, Gina Stryler, and Carrie Parker. Thank you to my heroes, Simon Small, Angelica Lofton, Jennifer Statmiller, Jennifer Watkins, Geraldine Hilmar, PJ Schuster, Denise Hoskins, Ranjini Mohan, and Tina Strassheim. If you would like to join these amazing people and all the patrons who are supporting this work, you can just go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can also just go to joyfulvegan.com and click on the support button. So to answer the question, do the words bride and groom have to do with horses? The answer is yes and no. Never an easy answer. And of course, when it comes to etymology, it is difficult sometimes to know the exact origins. And sometimes they have a very long journey to get to where they are. So let me explain the yes and the no. The word bride has nothing to do with the word bridle, period, full stop. Nothing to do with horses, nothing to do with the word bridle. The word bride has meant woman about to be married, or just married, ever since it was first borrowed into English from the Germanic languages around the year 1000. Okay, it came into Old English as the word bryd, most likely pronounced brid, that it would have been just more of a long I sound, brid, and then eventually obviously took the short I and became bride. But when it first came into Old English, it was brid, bryd. Okay, so hold that thought. Then you have the word bridegroom, right? Now bridegroom simply means man on his wedding day. So you had bride, meaning woman on her wedding day or about to be married. Bridegroom, man on his wedding day. The original form of this term, bridegroom, was also Old English, and it would have been bríd-guma or bríd-goma. So bryd, bríd, guma, Guma. And the word guma is an Old English word that simply meant man. That word fell out of favor. We don't use that word, but it still it has remnants here in the bridegroom, or I should say in the groom part of bridegroom. So it showed up first, actually, in the term bridegroom, but it was bríd-guma. It wasn't bríd-grooma. It wasn't bríd-groom. It was bríd-guma or bríd-goma, okay? And that combined bríd, bride, with the Old English word for man, which was guma or goma, okay? Over the years, this is how language happens. This is how language changes. Over the years, people stopped using guma, meaning man, by itself, but we're still using the term bríd-guma. So this happens in other words as well. It's such a fascinating thing. They don't use the word guma anymore on its own, but it's still there. It's still got this like fossil in the word bridegroom, but then it was bríd-guma. Eventually, people began substituting the more familiar word groom, because by then guma started changing to groom, and the now obsolete guma was replaced by groom in bridegroom. So bríd-guma became bridegroom for no other reason than it just sounded better. It felt better in the mouth. So guma became obsolete as its own word, but in the word bridegroom, it remained. But then the word groom started being used to refer to, and I'll talk about that in a moment, servants of a particular ilk. And that word groom, which always referred to a man or a male servant of a particular ilk, became the word in bridegroom. So that's how it happened. So bride and bridegroom have nothing to do with horses, but we do have that word groom to refer to a person who's responsible for some or all aspects of the care and feeding and grooming of horses, right? So a groom is someone who takes care of horses. Now that word groom, the etymology is probably guma. It's probably from the word for man, because they've always been male attendants, boys, male, like they've never been women. So it probably, the word groom to refer to the horse attendant probably came from the word guma or goma, meaning man. But today we do have that term groom now, and we've had it for hundreds of years. We've had it since the 1600s to refer to the person who takes care of horses. And then, of course, it got expanded to and generalized to grooms in waiting, grooms of the great estate, people in the royal household, which I'm sure all of you can relate to. Having the grooms in waiting referred to basically male servants in a large estate, in a large house. So the word groom did become more generalized to refer to servants, male servants in general, but it also still refers to someone who attends to the care of a horse. And so to me, groom today is an animology, even though bridegroom, not really an animology, because it's not really how that happened. I hope that makes sense. So the answer is no, is what the answer is. Groom in the sense of someone who is a man who is just married, not an animology, but groom relating to someone who cares for horses, and an animology. And so to use a hackneyed expression, last but not least, we have the word hackneyed. See what I did there? Hackneyed is an animology. It's probably my favorite of this whole episode. Hackneyed is an animology. My favorite because you would never know that it was an animology. And it's a horse-related animology at that. The word hackneyed, as we use it today, as I just used it, means trite, cliche, so overused as to have become uninteresting. That's what hackneyed means, right? A hackneyed phrase and all that. That word hackneyed was also shortened to give us the word hack, as in both a taxi for hire and as in working as a hack writer, like working as a writer for hire or hacking some computer code. We'll get there. So we want to go back in time to understand how hackneyed is related to horses as well as the word hack. So let's go back in time to pastoral England to understand the etymological origins of these words. Today, hackney, so if you know the UK or you live in the UK, you live in England, you live in London, you know that Hackney is a place name embedded within London. But in the 1300s, it wasn't. It was a small village whose surrounding open countryside was green and verdant and filled with really high quality grassland where horses could be pastured and bred. So the horses bred in this verdant grassland were riding horses. They were not used for war. They were not used for pulling. They weren't drought horses. They weren't these huge war horses. And I do talk about the different kinds in the previous episode, part 1. But these were riding horses, the horses bred here. And so hackney became the standard term for a horse of this type, a very simple riding horse, became a hackney horse. Now, because these horses were often made available for hire, the word hackney also came to refer to any horse who was intended to be hired out. Later, the emphasis shifted from horse to hire. And so basically, hackney referred to any passenger vehicle similarly available. So a hackney coach or a hackney carriage became any vehicle pulled by a horse still, a hackney coach or a hackney carriage, that was any vehicle for hire. This last term became the usual one for a vehicle that could be hired. And so even referring to motorized vehicles, you have hackney. Now, horses of the hackney type were often worked very heavily. They worked hard. They were used to the point of exhaustion. And so you would expect any poor animal who was used for, it's being hired out for all sundry reasons would just be, tired out and kind of, overused to the point of drudgery. And so that's how you get the figurative term. Something that's hackneyed is something that's overused to the point of drudgery. And so it refers to these poor horses who were hired out, worked heavily, and just overused. And so by the middle of the 16th century, you have this term hackneyed to apply to people in this sense, not animals, but people. In the 18th century, so it just keeps going. In the 18th century, that word hackney and hackneyed were shortened to hack, as in hack work, right? And that term became applied to any kind of work that was like kind of poor, but like just churned out. That's why it is often used to refer to hack writers, because they would just be churning out poor quality writing to just earn a living. And so they were called hacks. And so today you still hear that term hack writer, hack journalist as a pejorative term to refer to someone who's just churning out poor quality work. So it came from Hackney, the region where horses were bred and pastured, and then became the name of the horses who were hired out for riding purposes, who were so overused to be overworked, right? And just to a point of drudgery. That term began to be applied to them, but then it began to be applied to people, and hackneyed became shortened to hack. And that term hack, by the way, was also used to refer to a cab, to refer to any taxi. So the person who drove the hackney carriage or the hackney coach would have been referred to as a hack, or the vehicle itself would have been referred to as a hack. Now that word fell out of fashion in English and it was replaced by the French word taxi. Today, some of London's black taxis are still sometimes referred to as a hack or a hackney cab. Right. So you still see remnants of it today. Now you know why. And we still use the word hack to refer to hack, like I said, hack writers, hack authors, hack journalists. Hack work is laborious, tedious, unrefined work. And so over time, that word came to be used also for someone who is kind of messing with computer models. And that became a word that started in the 1959. It was a member of MIT's Tech Model Railroad, wrote a dictionary of tech terms and used the word hack in that dictionary to refer to someone who's just, drudging along, writing code. And so that's why we have that word hack today in computer technology, hacking into your computer, hacking in, comes from 1959. And so it's related to drudgery, but it could also be, and especially today when we say hacking in, like cutting in, like chopping in really crudely, there was an older meaning of the word hack, which meant to cut, to chop with repeated blows, like hacking down a tree. That's a different etymology than the one I just described with hackneyed. But the term hack, like hacking into a computer, there seems to be a parallel path with that term, as in hacking into a computer, a parallel path between drudgery and chopping and cutting crudely. Okay. So anyway, but there you have it. You have the word hack, hackneyed, hackney, groom, unbridled, bridle, path, carbine, bidet, pony keg, pony beer, pony glass, horse bread, horse collar tackle, horse opera, horse pistol, horse shite, iron horse, horsepower, horseshoes, rocking horse, clothes horse, pommel horse, mule, and its related saw horse, all words and terms from our equine friends. And may we continue to do better by them and not keep doing things that harm them. I will be doing an episode specifically on horse issues. There's too many to talk about in probably one episode, so I'll probably be breaking that up. So we'll have lots more to say about that. But I hope you've enjoyed all of the terms and expressions that are related to horses, some of which you probably use on a daily basis and did not realize were etymologies. And I hope you have fun With that, I hope you have fun talking to your friends and family about animalogies they might be using. As I said, will probably share some of the more obscure ones with supporters at different levels who get bonus material, so look out for that. And please let me know if I have failed to mention other obvious ones. You can send me a message through Instagram, or you can head over to joyfulvegan.com and do just that. While you're over there, be sure to head over to the new store. You can find at the new store, as I described earlier, my books, my classes, but you can also find links to and coupon codes for 40% off my favorite juicer, the Nama juicer. You can find the link for and the coupon code for 15% off my favorite sustainable zero waste hair care, personal care products by Plain Products. And you can find the link for and the coupon code for 10% off my go-to vegan supplements by Complement. And of course, as you're there, you can sign up for any of the cooking classes, one-on-one coaching, whatever you like. In the meantime, I hope you're using some animalogies for the animals. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.